neighbors, welcome back to the channel. This is Anarchy in the 603, and you're in for yet another postcard from your friendly neighborhood anarchist. Absolutely nobody's favorite, likely edited, D-tier production quality dispatch from the top of my dome straight to wherever you are sitting at the moment. And right now I am running a quick errand, but I wanted to go over a few things just in case you think that maybe, judging from my last video and the ones before, all I have to do in my life is complain, and I wanted to actually go over a bunch of the things that I am grateful for. First and foremost, my family, my husband, my son, our housemates, everybody in the household honestly has been such a support to me, I wouldn't be the person that I am today without them. Everyone in that house has had an invaluable role to play in shaping the person that I am today, and I love them entirely and completely as they are, for who they are now, and for who they have been all these years, as they have been becoming the people that they are now. Thankful for my very special needs cat for holding on throughout these 4 years while I have been so ill and unable to do as much for her as I could prior to this. Hopefully, things will be getting easier for us all soon so that we can further improve her health. Also thankful for my snapping turtle. Gar, Danger Snoot, big old turd, first of his name. He's only 6 months old and is an absolute joy. And extended beyond that too, like other lives that touch me. My grandson and his mom. I did not expect to become a grandmother so young in my life, but neither did they have any expectation of being parents so young. That's a saga that's not mine to tell. But long story short, make sure that you check your medication interactions when you're on hormonal birth control. We had an unexpected life come into our lives when none of us were anticipating it to happen, and the only thing to do was to love that baby, because that baby didn't ask for the situation, and honestly, neither did anybody else. And the only thing that you can do is to not shame anybody and to ensure that everyone involved has as much of the tools that they need to thrive and to help that little one go strong. And he is an absolutely brilliant little neurodivergent, much like his parents and his grandparents before them. And he was reading at the age of 3, just like his Lola, myself, and is currently in kindergarten and is absolutely thriving. I'm thankful for my larger community as well. I live in a really wonderful part of the country. I know we have our struggles. We have a housing crisis here in the state that our state government is not doing near as much as it could to ameliorate the problem. We were one of the worst states, hardest hit by the opioid epidemic, which was exacerbated by the dire lack of mental health supports in the state. Back when I was still working for DHHS, there were only 3 private practitioners that were not a part of a local area agency network that were mental health providers that took Medicaid. And I know our state is very small. We're only about under a million, I think it's 1.5 million people. That's still not nearly enough supports. We don't have nearly enough supports as far as shelter for our homeless population. And before we talk about homeless versus unhoused, I want to make this with a caveat that I personally was homeless before, and I personally prefer to use the word homeless as opposed to unhoused, because personally to me, unhoused is patronizing, and it's incorrect. The issue, for me growing up, I had a house I could go back to. Oh, I had a house. It wasn't safe for me, but it was a house. It was a house where the worst of the SA portion, all of that had stopped when I was 12 years old, 13. But the physical like the pummelings, the draggings by the hair, all of that didn't stop. That did not stop until after I had moved out as a teenager. So yeah, it was much safer for me to be living in the back of my car. It was much safer for me to be couch cruising. Now, also from a former state worker perspective, there's something called McKinney-Vento homelessness. Essentially, not all homeless people are people living in a tent out in the woods by the park or past the graveyard or whatever. Most of the homeless people that you see on the street but you don't know where they go at night, how many people? I think at one point, irrelevant, but it's like a tenth of what we could be housing. I think it's like, if the max is 150, well, I forget what the bed max is at the warming station that's only open in the cold months, but I do know that there's a 1,500 person per night need of folks who would take a nightly bed in the Tri-City area of where I live if it were available. 1,500 people. That is 1,500 people, some of whom, yes, are living in tents out in the woods. Well, we only have a shelter here that's got like capability to house like between the big box stores and shit. But it's also people who are crashing on people's couches, who are sleeping 4 or 5 to a bedroom in a 1-bedroom apartment, or people who are sleeping in their cars, people who are couch surfing from one place to another, or they're staying in a spare room, but it's not like group housing situation where you have like housemates and it's kind of established like that. But it's just, they just so happen to have a guest room and they don't mind that you're there. If it's not a place that you can call your own where you get mail, it's considered your actual place of residence, that's McKinney-Vento homelessness. So coming up through social services after having been a homeless street kid at one point in my life, I prefer the term homeless. Anyway, back around from my digression. Yes, we do have a terrible homeless population situation here, and I'm not saying that the homeless people are terrible. What I'm saying is the situation that's forcing them to be homeless is terrible. There's not nearly enough addiction supports, there's not nearly enough mental health supports, all of the above. However, yes, we have our faults, but there are a great many things that we do right here in New Hampshire. I like as riddled with faults as it may be, I feel that concept of our micro-representative style of government, where there is one representative per every 3,000 constituents, thus leading to the largest legislative body in the country, and one of the largest legislative bodies in the world, just here in my humble home state, and we still meet in the same exact meeting hall that we did. Like, our state capital is the same one, in the same chambers where all of our state legislators have been meeting since the beginning. When everyone involved is truly acting in the best interest of their community, of their 3,000 constituents, the system truly can work wonders for representation that adequately covers the folks in our state. However, there are things that do need reform. Our government is one of them, and also our form of government also requires a lot of active participation. And like, thankfully, New Hampshire is a very participatory state government. Like, people do get very involved, even down to the state representative level. Fights can be extremely contentious, but again, that leads to the very purple character of our state, where it's not unusual to have our state swing like largely one color and yet votes for the presidential another one, or some other random quilt of like purple choices. And I'm thankful for that, and I'm grateful for that. I am actually very glad and grateful that despite the hardships that I was born to an immigrant family, I am able to see the perspectives from that of a person of color, and yet also someone who was native to this country and one of the oldest states. I mean, New England is home to like the birthplace of our nation and all of that. And being one of those original 13 colonies, despite my anti-colonialist stance, paradoxically, I do have a sense of pride in being a place that has very much been about their state motto, very live free or die. Yes, have we a lot of wrongs that we collectively as a people need to correct, really need to reckon with. I don't think that empathy is something dumb or terrible or sinful or shameful. I don't think that there's something wrong with shame either. There are a lot of things about the founding of our country, even within the founding of my state, that should be considered shameful. But there are also some things to take a lot of pride in. I'm thankful that I am able to contain room for nuance within myself. I'm also thankful that despite my disabilities, my physical disability, the way that my PTSD combined with my neurodivergence makes for difficulty adequately being able to juggle my life plus the stressors of your typical everyday life, like the typical 9-to-5 workday life that most people would be able to maintain. Work pace that I was able to maintain up until the last 4 years of my life, but everybody hits a wall eventually. And despite that book being a bit out of date, the term "the body keeps the score" is still valid, because those emotions do need to come out eventually. Just because you never let yourself feel them before doesn't mean that it's never time to feel them. I'm thankful that despite all of those difficulties and limitations, I do still persist. I do still try to actively engage within my community as best I can. That I still do find time to volunteer my time within my community to try to advocate for myself and other people who may have endured similar struggles to mine. I'm thankful that now, 30 years on from the Satanic Panic, that made it partially so difficult to validate the kind of abuse that I was going through and actually have people pay attention to it. I am glad that we are now looking back at things in retrospect and seeing things clearly with better eyes. I was a teenager in the 90s. I was 22 in the year 2000, and as much as I loved that time growing up, what a time to be young and in the local arts and music nightlife scene of that time, back when the southern seacoast portion of New Hampshire was considered a valuable northern branch to the local Boston touring music circuit, and a lot of some big, what were going to be next big thing bands were coming out of that area. It was an amazing time, that time before social media. And I really do think that we've lost a lot in those intervening years as third spaces have been increasingly corporatized and erased, and as social media and screen interaction has more and more taken up our social interaction time. We don't get that same kind of face-to-face networking that we used to, nor do we get the kind of peace away from our screens that we used to. I mean, I'm just sitting here talking to you guys, neighbors, right now, technically dictating these thoughts into a screen while I'm not even looking at it, while I'm going about my day, and recognize fully that the buffer of a screen is partially what puts up a buffer to our ability to empathize with people, because regardless of whether they are literally people who are just beyond your own backyard, it doesn't matter, because that screen they may as well be a whole world away. So it's easier to look away from these things that are happening around you and pretend that, that only happens to other people. I mean, I get that. I do. And I get how burnt out we get from having to see the darker sides of the world, or, having it fed to us algorithmically over and over again. I get that too. But I also am thankful for the advent of social media, because so much of my social network has been maintained through it. And also, hold on, y'all, of friends that I've made over the years, I've been able to maintain, however sporadically, because of social media. And I feel that very strongly that social media networks, if run ethically, without that whole move fast break stuff thing first and foremost in mind, without the main point of the user experience being how do I extract more out of you, and instead, like with the ethics forward leading of, no, how do we make connection, and if we do well at that, it will still grow, perhaps at a slower pace, but it will still grow, and there are still ways to find profit in that. Like, I do believe there is a way forward that way, and I think that, companies that put ethics first eventually are going to be the ones that come out on top. Of course, that just really depends on whether or not anyone in the seat of corporate power ever decides to do that kind of thing. But I mean, it's been working for Costco so far. I don't see why it wouldn't work for a social network. Anyway, yeah, like I was saying, though, I am grateful for a lot of things. I'm definitely grateful that I still have, a working vehicle and a roof over my head, and, I have access to adequate enough nutrition that I don't have to worry too much about that. But is it always the variety of food that I want? No, but I'm still grateful that I have it. Definitely grateful to be born to at least have witnessed the last gasp of what I believe was true if it was truly a great time to be American, and a time to be proud of America. I do think despite its flaws, the Carter years, I mean, I wasn't around really for them, but I was able to see what was remaining before the Reaganomics truly continued to the beginning steps of dismantling things and getting them to where they are today. Because it does remind me that, once upon a time, we did live in a country where companies believed in taking care of their employees. One where, they made childcare and a pension and a living wage accessible to people, and they still turned a profit. Was it as big of a profit as, cutting everything in favor of shareholders? No, but it was still always steady growth. I do believe, I dare to dream of a better future where we have learned our lessons hard enough, long enough. I do take heart from the fact that, yeah, we are a young country. New Hampshire is home to the 7th oldest colonial settlement in the nation. Their quadricentennial just hit back this past year in 2024. If you think about it, every single massive government that has ever become something as big as say Versailles or the Roman Empire, when they get that big, that complicated, that Byzantine, as far as how everything operates, where you have entire classes of people that exist only to feed that machine, ultimately what you end up with is an absurd, overweight system that cannot sustain itself and eventually has to get a little fucking weird before it fixes itself up again. So yeah, like I was saying, once a government gets as big as, say, something like Versailles or the Roman Empire, you end up with this massive entity of bureaucracy of not just and I'm not talking about the bureaucracy of federal workers, okay? Let's not get this twisted. The fact is, we have a massive country. We have a lot of moving parts in this massive country. In order to have it flow properly, you have to have a brigade of dedicated civil servants who are nonpartisan, who just want to do their goddamn job and make sure that, the gears keep turning properly, that the grants go where they're supposed to go, that people get their insurance, that people get their social security checks, etc., etc. Talking about are the campaign analysts and the lobbyists and, the pollsters. You know why we have no campaign finance reform. We can't run these long-ass campaigns anymore. Well, there go half of your analysts that keep on forecasting which way your weather vane is supposed to turn, 3 years before your actual election. The machine exists because the machine wants itself to exist. And that's what I'm saying. Every government gets to this point. The fact just is that the United States, well, we just happen to be this country that's getting to that point of getting too big for its own britches and getting weird in the government and shit having to collapse wicked hard. We're the ones that happen to be just living through it in the modern age. We keep on reading about ascendant imperial powers and how they eventually got too bloated and collapsed, and yet we seem to feel like we're above such things. But that's what happens when you get complacent. And the neoliberalism idea of go along to get along, let's not rattle the status quo, let's just keep the status quo going because it's doing the best amount of good and the most amount of good for the people at the top, and that's gotta come trickling down eventually. That whole idea of shuttering and siloing off the daring to dream for better, the imagination that it takes to think of a better way of doing things, a better way of this system, that's neoliberalism's point. That's the point of the status quo, and that's what has gotten us to where we are. By and large, otherwise decent people have just sort of allowed the idea of status quo, the idea that, you can't fight back against them anyway, there's just no point in trying, so you just don't. The preemptive compliance, the preemptive rolling over, the preemptive giving up before you even get up to try. I may be tilting at windmills all the time, but I am grateful for the spine that I have in tilting at those windmills to just keep on goddamn trying, because somebody has to. Somebody has to try against impossible forces in order for something seemingly impossible to actually happen. I am not one to forget that one of the most successful sit-ins ever in U.S. history was done at the hands and the feet and the wheels and the walkers of disabled people who got up and demanded for our right to an education just like every other American citizen is entitled to free and equitable education. We weren't granted that prior to the 70s. And guess what? Disabled people fucking fought for more accessibility, because a more accessible world is a more accessible world for everybody. And I'm grateful to all of the revolutionaries that came before me, not just in my own family line, but in just in the world before me, not just in this country, but worldwide, revolutionaries that I take a whole lot of inspiration from, that keep me going. When I think about the struggles that we're going through today, I look back at history and I see the parallels, and I understand that, other civilizations have gotten through this and they're still here. The French Revolution happened, Versailles crumbled, it's a museum now. But you know what I mean. France still stands as a nation. The fall of the Roman Empire, but Italy still exists. Shit's happened before. It's not like it's not going to happen again. We just happen to be living in it, through it, and I'm lucky that I'm grateful that I do have that long view that helps me not despair. I'm grateful for the tenacity that I have, for the resilience that I have, even though I get tired. And yes, I'm gonna bitch. Every time you shovel into the dirt and you, say you're digging a ditch, right? And you shovel and you grunt with exertion, that's you bitching, okay? Me bitching is me grunting with the exertion that it takes to get through from one day to the next. And if the exertion that it takes to get me from one day to the next is bitching, well, I'm glad that I still have the platform to bitch on. I'm glad that y'all comment on my shit so that I can comment back to you. Because guess what? It's still engagement, and I'm glad for it. So, I'm very grateful for every bit of engagement that I get, whether it's positive or negative, whether it's insightful or insulting, I don't care. It's still something. And, I'm grateful that even after all these years of keeping quiet, by and large, like when I had to, because again, when you're working, especially working for the state, you have to keep your private, thoughts to yourself because it's not professional. But I'm thankful to be crazy. I'm thankful to be lunatic enough to not care what people think about me. If I go on about how there is no ethical consumption under capitalism or whatever, they'll just be like, oh, there's that crazy bitch in the backyard again. And I'll be like, yep, you goddamn right. And I'm still going to be at it. I'm thankful for all of that. Not stopping, going forward. Like, I have a life to lead. I have a future generation that I am fortunate to get to watch grow and be a part in that. I love my community, both online and off. And while I wish that I could be living through some pretty boring times, the fact that I am seeing history unfold and I get to know where I stand, like, if you've ever wondered what you would have done under any other fascist regime, insert anyone here, whatever you would have done at that major point in history, you're doing it now. Whether that's tuning out, turning things off, capitulating, rolling over in compliance ahead of time, whether it's resisting by being a voice of dissent and putting yourself out there publicly, either virtually or physically, whether it's making sandwiches for protesters and driving by and handing some sandwiches out the window or some hot coffee or something, or writing into your House of Representatives when they're trying to pass some BS law that is only going to harm the constituents of the state. And that's another thing that I do, is I am very active and participatory in my local state government, as well as whatever national shit that I can hold any sway in with my one vote. But yeah, I do look at House bills coming up. I do look at proposals. I do put in my voice for opposition or for approbation, depending on the situation. Whereas there's still a lot of complaining in this video, of course. There's always gonna be. It's me. But I do have a lot that I'm grateful for. And I am still gonna keep on keeping on, nonetheless. Squeaky wheel gets the grease, kids. And if you never say that things are wrong, again, if you're so willing to send back an undercooked hamburger at a restaurant, I don't see why you shouldn't stand up and be vociferous when you see some kind of injustice happening in the world around you, whether it's happening to you or happening to any other human being. If it's unjust, why aren't you saying something? I see plenty of people who will complain left, right, and center about their DoorDash order, but they won't. And I don't order DoorDash, nor do I delivery drive for them. But I'm just saying, I know people who will be more than happy to let the whole world know about how shitty their DoorDash driver was, and the service, and the food, and blah, blah, blah. But, they won't do a goddamn thing when they see, a U.S. citizen getting detained in chains because ICE thinks that they're a filthy, filthy immigrant that's here to Turk or gerbs. Y'all can say shit about that, but goddamn if they forgot your ketchup, Janine. Anyway, I'm rambling again, but yes. I'm here. I'm cranky. Get over it. I love yous. And I hope that you are continuing to have a beautiful day, as am I. See you later, neighbors. This is Anarchy in the 603, and I am out.